Hey guys, so today's video is going to be completely different than what I normally do. I normally script out my videos, but in today's video, I'm going completely unscripted. So sorry if it's a little all over the place. I'm not used to doing this, so we'll see how it goes. I'm not scripting it because I really think that this video needs to get out soon. The information in this video I really want to be out in the public as soon as possible. And usually when I script my videos, they take a minimum of 2 weeks from start to finish, and I just don't have time to do that. And secondly, if any of you watched my last video that I did where I tell my story about growing up as a missionary kid, that video was extremely exhausting for me. It took a month and a half for me to finish it, and I really don't want to script right now, so I'm not going to. Recently, there's been some court transcripts that have been made publicly available from the Young Living versus doTERRA court case. This was back a couple years ago when Young Living tried to sue doTERRA, and Young Living actually lost that lawsuit, which is something I'll talk about later. I'm not exactly sure how the transcripts became public, but for the last week or so, they've been kind of venturing around in the Young Living circles because they're kind of crazy. If you read the transcripts, I really can't emphasize enough how just completely batshit crazy these transcripts are. And they honestly show that Young Living and its founders and executives have been lying to their reps for years. In today's video, we're going to be reading through some of those transcripts, and I'm actually going to be bringing my husband Drew from Genetically Modified Skeptic on to read the transcripts with me. As some of you guys probably already know, Drew has some of the biggest videos on YouTube about Young Living, and years ago, he and I almost joined Young Living because we had family members who were in the company, but thankfully we researched into it and didn't join. But before we jump into the transcript, let me give you guys a little bit of a backstory into what's been going on with Young Living recently. The last few years, Young Living has been completely imploding and distributors have been leaving by the droves. Back in January of this year, Mary Young, who's the CEO of Young Living, and she's also the wife of the late Gary Young, who was the founder of Young Living, she was giving a speech at this Young Living event. I think it's an annual event that they put on for the leadership ranks. I think this year it was for platinum and above ranks. And in her speech, she basically talked about how Young Living for the last year has been operating in the red and they've been hemorrhaging money. If I'm remembering correctly, I think she even was kind of guilting the distributors into helping Young Living save money.
I can't do anything. It's just really frustrating. What did you think about Christian? Who's talking?
We also can't hear you. You know, you don't have to have a mask on while you're on stage, right?
You mean I can take it off?
Yeah, of course you can.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. You know what? It's the wrong color anyway. Doesn't even go with my outfit. How long do you think Young Living could survive if we don't have any profit and we're operating in the hole? We're operating at a loss. Can any business survive that? Can it? Come on. No business can survive that. Why have so many businesses gone out of business? Because they can't operate at a loss. I'm telling you, we have to make changes. We have to make little changes. Maybe we have to raise the price a little bit. Maybe we have to raise shipping. We are going to have to raise the price of shipping. Things are going to happen. You don't have to. I am asking you to share with us in the costs that are going up in order for us to have that which we love so much, that which is so important to us in our lives.
So obviously financially, Young Living's not doing well. And then also earlier this year, there was a Royal Crown Diamond, which is the highest rank in Young Living. He came out with a book called My Word Made Flesh, and I actually made a video about this book. And the book caused this huge stir in Young Living because a lot of reps thought that the book was demonic or occultic. I mean, personally, I don't think the book is like satanic or something because I don't believe in the supernatural, but it was super weird. It contained these like affirmations that some reps took as seances. That you were supposed to use along with oils in order to treat different ailments. So it was very bizarre and woo-woo. The book wasn't published by Young Living, but it did contain a foreword from Mary Young, the CEO, and it was also, I think, distributed to all of the leadership ranks in Young Living, so it was obviously very highly endorsed by the company. And the book really caused an uproar and tons of people started leaving. And then finally, just in the last few weeks, Young Living announced that they're closing down 4 of their markets, which are China, Russia, Colombia, and Brazil, which means that in less than 30 days, over 7,000 people will be essentially laid off and will no longer have their income from Young Living that they've depended on for some people probably have depended on it for years. So that's a little bit about what's been going on in Young Living. Clearly, they're not doing well financially and the company is kind of crumbling. Now with these court transcripts being made public, I don't think that they can recover. I'm pretty sure that they're just a sinking ship at this point. So there's literally thousands of pages of the court transcripts, and I'm not going to be reading through all of it because we would be here for like 48 hours just reading this. But I've gone ahead and picked out some specific parts of the transcripts that I really think need to be talked about and exposed because, I mean, I just could not believe some of the things that people said. It's crazy. But I will be putting a link down in the description that has the entire court transcripts if you guys are interested in going deeper on it. I'm sure that there's other crazy things that I've missed that maybe other people can find. And also, if you want some more information on what's going on in Young Living, I highly suggest you follow MLM Mombi on Instagram. She's been covering this entire Young Living debacle on her Instagram page, and it's kind of funny because I was sent all this information from a third party who would rather not be named. And I was getting ready to send it to her, and I went on her Instagram and saw that she was already posting about it. So I was like, okay, Mombi is already on the case. She already has everything she needs. So Mombi is very good at her job. She's always on the case and she's got this shit down. So I definitely suggest following her on Instagram if you want to stay up to date with what's going on in Young Living. I'd also suggest following Simply Juliana Evans on Instagram. She's also been someone that's been exposing a lot of what's going on. She is a former Young Living rep that's since left because of everything that's been happening. So she's been really good at keeping everyone up to date, so I definitely give her a follow too. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, so for you and for everyone else watching at home, this court transcript came from a lawsuit that Young Living filed against doTERRA. doTERRA was founded in 2008 by some former Young Living executives. doTERRA kind of split off from Young Living. And Young Living was alleging that doTERRA founders violated their employment contracts and ran off with trade secrets to found doTERRA. And Young Living was seeking $12 million in damages. Ultimately, they lost the lawsuit and was ordered to pay doTERRA $1.8 million in attorney fees. The court ultimately ruled that doTERRA executives hadn't breached their contract with Young Living, and that Young Living had pursued the lawsuit in bad faith. And the judge in the case also found that Young Living had tampered with a computer to mislead the court. So this first transcript that we're going to be looking at is from when the court called David Stirling to the stand as a witness. David Stirling is one of the founders of doTERRA, so he used to work for Young Living, and now he's doTERRA's CEO. Okay, so we're kind of starting in the middle of the transcript here. And we're going to go back and forth reading. I am going to read where it says question or Q. That's the lawyer asking the witness a question. And then you can read where it says A, and that's the witness. In this case, David Stirling. That's the answer that he's giving to the questions.
All right.
In item 9, it said you interfered with Gary Young's directives to the marketing department. Do you remember disputes between you and Gary Young about his marketing plans?
Oh, all the time.
I brought up the concept of seed to seal. Have you heard of that term before?
I have.
Was Gary Young in or about the summer of 2007 trying to make a new marketing plan called Seed to Seal?
He was.
Can you tell the jury, first, were you satisfied with that concept?
It's a great term if it were true, but it wasn't true. It would imply that you had complete control over your oils from the seeds planted in the ground through the growing process, through the distillation process, and up until putting the actual label on the bottles. That's what it was implying.
You were supposed to have grown it on your own farm and then distill it, as Mr. Young testified, and then put it in the bottle.
Correct.
Did he want you to make a marketing plan consistent with that while you were at the company?
Yes, very much so.
Were you comfortable with doing that?
We were not.
Why were you not comfortable?
This was a real point of consternation among us as an executive team because we knew that not even 1% of the essential oils were produced from the farms. And therefore, this was a stretch beyond imagination of just something that simply wasn't true.
Wait a minute. Gary Young got up here and testified that he grew I saw a truck on the road that said, I grow them in Utah and Idaho and France and Oman, and I think there was one other place. Was that not true? Was he not growing the vast majority of his oils on his own farms?
The farm in France was 25 acres. The farm in Idaho was a very small farm as well. It's just simple mathematic calculations. If anybody ever did that, it was very, very clear that less than 1% of the oil that they were selling could have come from the farms.
When you were the chief operating officer, would you know where the source of those oils were?
Without a doubt, and we knew where all, yeah.
And did you know where all the farms were?
Oh, yes.
And did you know where your company, Young Living, was buying the oils at the time?
Yes.
And were they buying oils or were they manufacturing their own oils on their own farms?
The oils, of course, the vast majority of the oils were being purchased through brokers. And these, anyone, though, really just one, and there's a couple more, but one primary broker.
Were there complaints at the time that you were trying to field as the CEO that the oils that Young Living then had were not as effective as they should have been?
Yes.
When did that kind of complaint start happening?
That started to happen particularly in the last probably couple of years that I was there.
Did you have discussions with Mr. Young on this concept of claiming that their oils were seed to seal when in fact they weren't?
Yes.
What was said between you and he?
Very strong arguments. Basically he knew that this would be a very powerful marketing ploy. And myself in particular, the CFO, Steve Bentley, we were adamantly against it, primarily because I figured it would be so easily disproven it would damage the company.
As a person involved in the industry, are you generally familiar with the concept of false advertising? What do you understand that to be in your layman terms?
In layman terms, it would be just misrepresenting the truth, falsely claiming one thing about your product that is just simply not true.
Did you believe that Mr. Young's claim about seed to seal would be false advertising within the definition you just gave us?
I absolutely believe that.
Did you tell him that?
Yes.
So basically, it's come to light that only 1% of Young Living's oils meet their seed to seal promise, and that the vast majority of it is just they buy it through brokers, which is not what they advertise as at all.
You mean an MLM is engaging in false advertising? How often does that happen?
I mean, for me, I've always I don't understand how people don't see that that's just marketing. And it's not just MLM companies that do that. Tons of companies have these marketing ploys that they act are, super official and real. But really, when you get down to it, it's just marketing. It kind of reminds me of how they use their therapeutic grade or whatever, certified pure.
doTERRA does certified pure therapeutic grade, which doesn't mean anything because
they came up with that term. It's not like this term that some third party or governing agency came up with. It's just a term that they coined.
Right.
But they act like it's so serious when it's that could mean anything.
Yeah. We've been saying for years that if a company is making up their own terms to certify their own products as a standard of quality, then you should probably run very quickly in the other direction. But it's taken until these court documents come out and people have read them themselves for them to realize, maybe that was a good point.
Yeah. And who knows, like, if there's actually any difference between Young Living's oils and oils that you can, like, just buy at Target.
Right.
Like, because they're buying the oils through these brokers, and who knows, like, what other companies these brokers are selling to. So it's likely that, you know, like, the $5 essential oil you can buy at Target is the same, you know, $50 oil that you can get from Young Living. Okay, so this next court transcript, they call to the stand, let me see your name, Jan Meredith, who was at the time of the trial a doTERRA distributor who had previously been a distributor for Young Living. I think she was one of the first distributors that doTERRA pulled from Young Living into itself. How about seed to seal? Have you heard the term used, seed to seal?
Yes, I have.
And where did you hear that from?
At conventions and through Young Living and various sources.
Did you have any concern with that concept of this?
Okay, so first thing is, it didn't seem like that was possible to me because frankincense trees don't grow here. There are a lot of oils I don't think it's possible to produce by one company. I'm pretty certain of that. Another part is that they were moving a lot of essential oil. They really were supplying a lot of essential oil. And I grew up on a farm, and I know a bit about yields of crops. I don't know specifically about lavender, but there's no way in the world that I could see that anyone, not a gigantic company, big company, yes, not mega company, could do that. It didn't seem possible.
When you say could do that, meaning what?
Could literally do a seed to seal. I don't know how in the world that would be possible.
Meaning you thought someone had to buy lavender.
Of course.
How about complaints by people in your downline that was buying product from Young Living? Did you get complaints from them? The answer is yes?
Yes.
And from whom did you get those complaints?
I had 2 people who were massage therapists, and they developed, and I saw these rashes on their arms. They were using Young Living oils. They were horrible, horrible rashes. One worked on through it. The other one just stopped her practice until she got it healed up. That was one. I had another one who has had for years deteriorating discs and really a lot of spinal stuff. And she was having really good results initially with, I don't know how to say that oil, but an oil. And the 2 to 3 years later, she says, I guess my body has gotten used to it. It's not working anymore. What can I use instead? So she didn't use it for quite a long time. That all changed again when I started with doTERRA, and I said, try this lavender or this. There's that oil again. See if it works. And it did as it had before originally.
So that person changed from the Young Living's product to doTERRA and had better results.
Yes.
How about the smells of the oils? Did you notice any difference in the smells?
I did.
Between the 2 companies?
I did. Over that period of time, I got myself pretty well educated about oils and became a certified aromatherapist with an independent school and had learned how to assess these various levels of smells and so on. So there would be variations, and it's normal to have crop years produce slight different chemical makeup. Some of those little minor ones, that's not unusual. There was one year when peppermint, the Young Living peppermint, was way different, extremely different. It smelled more like, and I don't remember which other oil, but it smelled more like another one from the herb oils, perhaps rosemary. And I didn't say anything to anyone about it. I, had noticed it. And then several people in my downline called, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 8, several, and said, what's going on with peppermint? And the explanation was it's different because it's a different crop year. It can't be that different.
You remember the question? My question is, did that affect your state of mind as you viewed Young Living with these types of complaints being made to you?
Yes. I became more cautious for myself as well as for the people who relied on me for information and teaching.
Did you have any experience with back orders at Young Living?
Yes.
What were the experiences you had?
There would be back orders, and there would frequently be things completely out of stock that for a longer period than they could do a back order time on for myself and other people.
You mentioned religion was promoted at Young Living. Who promoted it?
Oh, Gary Young was, from the stage at large gatherings.
On the stage?
Yes.
What would he say?
The one I remember most was an event in insert French pronunciation here, in which he was moving from one segment of the presentation to another. I don't remember what those segments were, but it kept dragging on, I do remember. He was doing emotional clearing work. And we couldn't start that process until everybody got on board. And I remember him saying very clearly from the stage, there's a group of people here who are not yet lined up with this, and Father tells me not to go on until they line up with it. It didn't kind of work for me.
So he was suggesting he was having a discussion with God the Father?
Yeah.
Is that how you understood that? You can answer how you felt.
He was saying, Father will tell me when it's time, and then he would talk and talk and talk. And then he would say, well, Father says it's not time to do this yet. So there were a lot of differences to, I'll do this when Father tells me it's true, and that means you guys have got to get in line.
Was he leaving the stage to make a call to someone, or was he...
It was all on stage, contiguous. He was on stage the whole time. At some point, I and a lot of people were getting really physically and mentally very tired, so I put my head down on the table. We were, long tables and was just resting that way. And several other people were doing that. And then who worked, I don't know who the people were, some people helping manage it, the event, came around and asked us to sit up again.
You indicated that after he mentioned that he was waiting for his father to tell him to go forward, you put your head on the table. Is that correct?
It got to be a long time with no break, yes.
And you put your head on the table and someone came up and tapped you on the shoulder and asked you to sit up.
Yes.
Did that kind of episode affect your decision to stay with Young Living?
It was just one more black mark against for me.
What did he say about homosexuality, if anything?
If they would just come to me, I could cure them. Wow. Whoa. Okay.
How did he say it, if at all? How is he going to cure them?
Well, he was talking about oils and was talking about supplements and he was talking about hormones. And that was one of the statements about starting with the assumption that...
Where did he make those? Is it a public hearing, in other words, or a public meeting?
Yes. I remember him, I believe it was that one in French name
Place.
here. But it might have been at a convention. It was a group of a lot of people, somewhere 300 to 2,000.
And how did that affect you with respect to your view of Young Living after he...
I found it first of all, I didn't believe it. Secondly, I have a very different view about the whole thing, and I found it quite offensive.
It's not surprising to me that he thought he could cure homosexuality with
Every
oils.
conservative Christian man thinks that they know the one true cure to homosexuality, so it doesn't surprise me.
I mean, he thought he could cure everything with oils, but just the fact that he was going around saying that to people is kind of shocking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's shocking in one way because, just having the image of someone doing that is a little bit wild, but at the same time, if you know the type of people they attracted to be at the top of the company, you realize that this was a thoroughly, this was a religious cult, is what this
definitely
was. And so having ideas that you can cure or change someone's sexuality with your magic oils or something it's not out of place.
Yeah, and not all, but most people in MLMs, especially Young Living, tend to be conservative, right-wing, religious, and they probably wouldn't have too much of a problem with him saying that he could cure homosexuality or kind of giving the connotation that there's something wrong with being gay. They probably didn't have a problem with that. Clearly, this lady that they called to as a witness on the stand had a problem with it, but I think the vast majority of people probably didn't really care.
I think speaking up in that company's culture against homophobia was probably pretty difficult if you actually wanted to stay in the company because you would be in a minority position.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you could really say anything against what Gary Young said.
Right.
Because he would definitely made himself a god in that company. We have Puggles here now because he was very, very upset that we were keeping him out of the room. So if you hear a bunch of
gurgly
sounds or snorting, that's from him. In this court transcript, they've called to the stand Mary Young, who is the CEO of Young Living and wife to Gary Young. And one of these issues here is number 9, interfering with Gary Young's directives to the marketing department. Do you see that item?
Yes, I see it.
That's because David Stirling was not comfortable with your program called Seed to Seal, correct?
I don't know if he was or he wasn't. I know he didn't like the farms, and he didn't want us to expand the farms. He didn't want us to put money into the farms, I remember. That was always a concern. That was always a problem.
You'll agree that as far as the seed to seal program, that your company never grew 50% or more of the oils that it sold, correct?
I don't understand what you're asking me.
On the issue of seed to seal, you'll agree that first, you don't know what percentage of oils that your company sells from your farms, correct? During the time that Mr. Stirling was there, right?
Not while he was there, no.
And you know that the majority of the oils do not come from your farms, correct?
Could you restate that again? Be more specific for me with time.
Totally not trying to dodge the questions
Not
at
at all.
Sure, you know that the majority of the oils that you sell or sold in 2007 did not come from your farms, correct?
What do you mean by majority?
Usually that term is 50% or more. More than 50% of the oils did not come from your farms.
At that time, I didn't really have any numbers, but at that time, probably not.
You haven't bought any more farms in 2007 other than a frankincense farm you claim you have in Oman, correct?
Our farms are continually expanding. We're continually buying land. I don't know how you can say that.
Your husband testified they had not expanded the farm since 2008. Are you telling us you expanded your farms since then?
We keep growing more acreage, planting more acreage. Mona is not any bigger. St. Marie's is not any bigger.
Your sales have gone up 10 to 12 times since 2007, correct?
I can't be specific about that.
You're the CEO. Who would know better than you?
I haven't been the CEO that long, and I haven't made comparisons from today to then.
You haven't been the CEO that long? You've been the CEO for 3 years. Is that what you're saying?
You're talking about 2007.
I am. And you were on the board in 2007?
Yeah, but I wasn't involved that much with the farms.
Let's get back to this. You've never at your company grown more than 50% of the oils that you sell, correct? Never?
You need to be specific about time. What time?
I said anytime.
I don't know. I don't know exactly how much we're selling now. I don't know what the comparison is between the farms we own, the partner farms, the certified farms. You're asking me a lot of numbers that I don't usually deal with all that.
I just think it's funny how she's like clearly dodging the question.
Yeah.
She knows that like most of the oils don't come from their farms,
Yeah.
but she doesn't want to say that, so she just
Absolutely.
keeps like dodging around it, being like, "Oh, what time are you talking about?"
What does majority mean?
Yeah, and like, how do you not know where your oils are coming from if you're the CEO?
Yeah.
Like, and you don't know like how many oils you're selling and producing. How would you not have numbers about that? Like, or at least a ballpark idea. Like, it kind of reminds me of in the LuLaRich documentary, they were asking, I forget what the name, Deanna, I think, who was like the CEO of LuLaRoe. They were asking her what the address was for the company headquarters, and she didn't know.
Yeah, she's like, oh, I don't know.
It's like, why all the CEOs of these MLM companies know nothing about the companies they run?
Yeah.
Where is your office?
It's in Corona.
And what's the address of the building?
I don't know.
You would think with how popular the seed to seal marketing ploy was that she would be able to say, oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if someone approached her at a convention and just, was interested in getting involved or was like a distributor or whatever and point blank asked her that, what do you think she would have said?
Oh, she probably would have said all of it.
Yeah, all of it. Absolutely. We would never sell oils that we didn't grow. That's what it's about.
But now that she's under oath
Mm-hmm.
and she can't lie about it, she's kind of beating around the bush.
Right.
Which shows they've been lying to their distributors and their customers this entire time.
Again, this is something that we have been saying for years, and we have been haters and sour grapes, and even though we were never in the company. And I mean, now that it's all out there, there are people that are getting out faster than ever, and I'm glad people are getting out faster than ever, but the writing has been on the wall for so long now. I mean, it's kind of sad that it's gotten to these court documents being released and publicly available for people to actually get out.
I mean, people have been leaving Young Living for like the last year over a myriad of reasons, but it's like people are just now realizing, like I've seen some people who were distributors for Young Living, but they like recently left, who are just now figuring out that Gary Young wasn't a doctor. I'm like, have you never Googled the founder of the company that you claim to like have a business with?
But
like,
on all the books that he wrote, it says D. Gary Young, and D stands for doctor, right?
It's like literally all you'd have to do is a quick Google search and all of that comes up. It's just like, how do these people not do that? So in this transcript, they called Gary Young to the stand because like this was when Gary Young was still alive. I think he died like shortly after this.
So I get to play the God King himself.
Yeah, you do.
A role of a lifetime.
When I start into the transcript here, the lawyer is talking about David Stirling, what Gary Young like fired him kind of, as I understand, a little bit over the seed to seal thing because David Stirling didn't want to say that it was seed to seal. So that's kind of like what they're referencing here. And the directive to the marketing department that he interfered with is you wanted to make a claim of seed to seal, that your company had all of these farms and you were making all of this oil and you did not buy it on the market. And you wanted to tell everyone on this new marketing campaign, seed to seal. And he, as the CEO, knew that was an absolute lie and said that he did not want to be part of the seed to seal program, right?
Not true.
Sir, your seed to seal, that's a false advertising claim that you continue to pursue with your company, correct? You don't grow a majority of your oils, do you, sir?
I don't know the exact percentages, but I know we grow a big percentage of our own oils.
How do they not know the percentages of their own company? When you told the jury your company grew a majority, that would mean more than 51%, right?
That would be correct.
And that's a lie.
I don't believe it is.
When you had confrontations with your management, who was Emily Wright and David Stirling at the time? They refused to participate in your claimed seed to seal because you did not grow the oil that you were claiming publicly.
That is false.
And since then, up to today, when you told this jury a moment ago, you continue to sell a majority of your oils. That is now especially untrue because of the amount of oil you now sell, right? You've grown in size by 10 or 12 times, correct?
Yes, correct.
And you haven't bought 10 or 12 as many farms, right?
From the day before?
From the day that they were there in 2007 to current, there aren't 10 or 12 times as many farms bought by Young Living.
No.
There's now 10 or 12 times as much oil sold without replacing it, correct?
Not correct.
You said you had 4 million distributors. That is misleading, correct?
That is on our books.
On our books, meaning at some point in time since you started the company in 1991, there were 4 million on your books?
I'm assuming that's correct.
And your company's policy is if they don't buy anything over what period of time is it that they're no longer considered to be an active distributor? 6 months, a year?
I think it's 1 year.
1 year? And how many of those 4 million haven't bought product in the last 1 year?
I don't know.
How many active distributors does your company have?
I would say probably monthly active 1.5 million.
Why would you want to tell the jury that you have had 4 million distributors when you only really have 1.5 million?
Because I was asked how many distributors we have. That's how many is in our books.
I am just like so confused why both Gary and Mary Young seem to have no idea about their company. Like, how do you not know how many active distributors you have? Or, I mean, clearly they've had to have bought oils from somewhere because they're saying that the company's grown, or they're selling 10 to 12 times as much oil, but they haven't bought 10 to 12 times as much land.
Right.
So like the numbers aren't adding up there, and like they're not even attempting to try to like explain that.
It's like, I don't know. I have no idea where those numbers came from. They're on our books somehow, magically, but I don't have anything to do with that as the owner or CEO of the company.
Yeah, it's like you obviously know. Like how would you not know?
Yeah. I wonder if him telling the jury that he had 4 million distributors was kind of like look how big and great. Yeah, a major brag when he's really grilled on it and he doesn't want that number to be high, then he changes it.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, the truth was always very relative to Gary Young. It was whatever he wanted it to be, to reach whatever goal he wanted, to serve himself, whatever. People basically worshipped this guy, and he was very clearly a pathological liar, if not like
Just
basically a psychopath.
okay, yeah.
I mean, like no moral compass
lived in
at
a
all.
fantasy world.
Yeah, he was not well.
Yeah.
And people, basically worshipped him because he was so good at just being charismatic. And again, if you understand the psychology of how these groups work, you understand the psychology of manipulative leaders of cults. The writing has been on the wall the entire time, but people are just now starting to see it.
Yeah. Have you instructed other people not to promote religion at these conventions?
That is our policy.
And the reason is promotion of religion has a tendency to turn some people off.
That's correct.
But you, at these meetings, you kind of have a kind of religious overtone in your presentations. Fair?
No.
What?
Yeah, uh-huh.
Well, have you ever stood on the stage and while you're doing your presentations say, I think I need to ask my father, and then you'd pause for a moment and then you'd say, my father wants me to do this. Have you ever said that on stage?
No.
Did you ever tell anyone that you had a special oil that could cure homosexuality?
No.
Like, obviously, he's just completely lying. Gary Young was, like, pushed religion like crazy.
Yeah, this is straight up perjury. I mean, the entire, like, the deep story, a term that sociologists like to use, of the company was that the invention of these oils, or like the creation of the oils that eventually became Young Living, was like this spiritual revelation from God. I mean, like, the whole backstory of Gary Young is that he was paralyzed in a logging accident. He tried traditional medicine, it didn't work, so he tried alternative medicine, including essential oils, and that worked, but only because God willed that to be so. And it was like this miraculous thing, and he realized that oils were a gift from God that he needed to share with the masses. And so he eventually did that. He put out books with, doctor in geology, David Stewart, about the healing oils of the Bible. It was not sold by Young Living, but was created by people who were involved in Young Living, and then sold in order to promote the idea that there is a religious narrative behind these oils. This was not just a business. This was a religious group. Young Living is not Young Living without the religious aspect of it.
I mean, and all of that was Young Living's founding myth.
Yeah.
Like the idea that God has put these plants on the earth so that we can heal ourselves naturally. Like that's the entire thing. That's their entire narrative. And so for him to sit on the stand and say that he doesn't push religion is like preposterous.
Yeah, I imagine that if video evidence of this exchange was played at one of the conventions, people would have been completely distraught. They'd be like, you are betraying God, because this is not a company. This is a family, and it's God's family.
Yeah.
They didn't see this as a business. They saw it as a religious calling, most of the
Yeah, and they
distributors.
like even interpreted the Bible and scripture in specific way in order to like fit their narrative about oils.
Right.
Like they would be like, oh, look at this verse. This verse is talking about oils or whatever.
I don't know to this day I've never known any distributor in Young Living, or even doTERRA actually, but especially like Young Living, that wasn't selling these based on some religious narrative, or didn't call being a part of Young Living a literal calling from Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, I've known people who like joined Young Living, but then like quickly left because they like realized, oh, this is like super religious-y and like I don't want to be a part of this. But like the people that stick with it and stay around, they're definitely, like I would say overwhelmingly, they're Christian or Mormon.
Yeah, and I think the fact that the impetus for this mass exodus of Young Living is like there's this book that's satanic that they're putting out there, that we have theological differences from Young Living now. I think that really testifies to the fact that this was a religious group just as much as anything else. I will say in D. Gary Young's, not doctor, but D. Gary Young's defense here, that he didn't say that he had a special oil that could cure homosexuality. He said that he could cure homosexuality. So, I mean, the oil, it's not the oil that's necessarily has like sexual magic in it. It was Gary himself. He is the sexual magician.
Well, just wait till we get further into the transcript.
Oh, God.
I was going to say, he wasn't saying that he could cure homosexuality. He says his oils support a heterosexual life.
Yeah.
Because they can only use terms like support or
Right,
whatever.
right. That's an FDA approved.
Yeah, FDA
claim.
approved. Now, at the time, you were living in Ecuador?
Yes.
And you were doing medical work down there, correct?
Yes.
You had patients?
Yes.
And you do surgeries.
I worked in a surgical unit.
You would actually perform, you had a video you displayed to your employees of you doing a surgery, correct?
That's correct.
You're not a doctor.
Yes.
So there's some other transcripts that talk about him performing surgeries that we'll get to later. So maybe if we want to save our comments till then.
Let's do it.
Okay, so this transcript, David Stirling, who's the CEO of doTERRA, he's on the stand. Was Gary Young treating patients down in Ecuador?
Yes, he was.
And did you see a video with him actually cutting some person up with a knife to do surgery?
Gallbladder operations, actually. The employees were...
I'm asking if you saw it.
Yes, I did.
And how is it that you saw the video?
Employees were required to watch it in a meeting at one point.
At Young Living?
Yes,
Who required them to watch Gary Young?
he did.
Cutting someone open to take out their gallbladder?
Gary did.
And when did that happen?
I don't remember. It was probably some period before this.
Just for reference, I think that the lawyer here is referencing a letter that Gary Young, or an email Gary Young sent to David Stirling, just so that gives kind of some context. I found the new patients, one more or less. I apologize for the delay in communication, but I've been overwhelmed with new patients. Was he still treating patients?
Yes, he was.
And is Gary Young a doctor?
No, he's not.
He holds himself out to be a doctor.
He does.
Ever attended medical school?
No.
Up in the 4th paragraph of this article, he says to you something about these things are all repairable through repentance and forgiveness.
Yes.
Did you see that?
Yes.
Was it Gary Young's nature to kind of put his company in terms of religious talk?
Yeah, quite a bit.
Was that offensive to distributors?
It was.
It says in that sentence down below there, however, that which hurt me and Mary deeply is the fact that you repeatedly told employees and distributors that I was a liability to Young Living, and you and the executive team had to keep me under control and away from Young Living. Is this related to that kind of concept you talked about a few moments ago where you felt Gary, picture, name, and article in every publication was not well-serving for the company?
That and many other things, yeah.
What besides the publications is this related to?
Well, he would say things to large groups of distributors, predicting the end of the world. What? Things like that, all kinds of stuff. Give blessings on stage, this sort of thing.
And then down in that same paragraph, it says, that was evidence to distributors as my name was not mentioned, my picture kept out of the magazine, and there were no articles from me, only from executives. Is that kind of how the company started to turn under your watch?
It did.
And what were you trying to focus on?
I viewed my fiduciary responsibility to be the company, to the employees, and to the distributors, and I absolutely viewed him as a liability.
Do you think that if Young Living would change its competitive nature, change away from where it was going, that it would do better in the industry than it had been in the past?
Absolutely.
Boy, it seems like a company called doTERRA was started soon thereafter. Did doTERRA use the methodology you proposed?
Without a doubt.
And then it says in here, is this the reason that you drug your feet about doing something about Quackwatch? Do you see that?
Yes.
Did you drag your feet about Quackwatch at all?
We really tried to fix Quackwatch. The problem is that much of the information as it was researched was correct. So it was very difficult to hide that.
You couldn't threaten a defamation claim unless it was actual.
That's right.
And a little bit of context here. I think you used the Quackwatch article about Young Living to make your first video about them. I'm pretty sure we used them as a resource.
Yeah.
So as I understand it, when I was reading through the transcript, Like David Stirling was charged with trying to get rid of that Quackwatch article because Gary Young didn't like it because it like painted him in a bad light.
Yeah.
But David Stirling was like, well, I can't really do anything about it. I can't like file a defamation court case about it or
it's
defamation lawsuit about it because it's all true.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think like David Stirling along with some other executives were really like near the end trying to like rein in Gary because he was like saying a bunch of crazy stuff and they're like, you can't say that.
Yeah. Funny enough, I think that Gary Young's charismatic cult leader type of persona was something that made the company successful, but usually, as we see with other cults, they burn very hot and bright for a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And then they end up burning out, which like Young Living is seriously burning out now. And obviously it kind of began back then with, Gary Young being someone they had to wrangle essentially.
Yeah. And that's very typical with MLMs. They tend to balloon up and then all of a sudden implode and like everyone's leaving and they eventually like don't exist anymore. And I think that, like you were saying, like he was a very charismatic person and kind of crazy and made all these outrageous claims, which worked. It drew people in, but ultimately it led to their demise because all of this stuff has caught up with them.
Yeah.
And Gary Young being associated with Young Living has stuck around forever. So whenever anyone researches or Googles Young Living, they're going to find stuff about Gary Young, which is going to deter them from wanting to join. So it's like it worked in the beginning to draw people in, and then it kind of ended up ruining them.
Yeah.
Or is going to ruin them. I'm pretty sure they can't recover from this.
It's really funny. I have utilized some of the stuff from Quackwatch, and I've directed distributors who have asked me questions to Quackwatch before, and they always say, oh, well, that stuff was all fabricated to make Gary Young look bad on purpose, and it's just all false. That is basically the work of the devil trying to overcome like God's workmen in this world. And I mean, it turns out that they couldn't actually do anything about that legally because it was all true. The devil was correct.
Yeah. And I mean, in that article was links to like newspaper articles and like I think police reports.
Yeah.
And so like linked to stuff that was legitimate. And actually the guy that runs Quackwatch, Stephen Barrett, I think that's his name.
So.
He was actually at the MLM Consumer Awareness Conference. He was like one of the presenters. So that's kind of cool. Like he's a very reputable person.
Yeah.
He's not going to just make stuff up.
It goes to show that resources like Quackwatch and videos like mine, they actually do get all the way up to the top and they bother these people.
Yeah.
I mean, it may seem like you're just shouting into the void when you're trying to expose the corruption within these companies and like how wacky some of these guys are, but it gets to the point where they want to, file a lawsuit. I mean, they wanted to file a lawsuit against me for just making some of this information that would be included in the whole Quackwatch report just more public, more like well known. But they couldn't do that because it was, again, like it was all true. Everything that I said was true. I sourced everything, and all the clips that I ever used of anything that they produced was all fair use. So, I mean, they threatened me with legal action multiple times, and I was just like, no, screw you. Like, you can't do anything about it. And they didn't. And, I mean, now that video has gotten to them. Quackwatch has gotten to them. So if you're making resources like this, if you're a person who likes to contribute to things like this, do it. It actually does lead to the downfall of these tyrants.
I was kind of like half expecting when I read through the court transcripts for like you to be brought up at some point. Like, oh, do you know about this YouTube video? Like, I was kind of expecting that because, I mean, your one Young Living video has like 2 million views something?
It's like 1.5 million maybe.
And okay.
Yeah.
And Mary Young like knew all about it and apparently cried about it.
Yeah.
So I was kind of surprised. Maybe you're mentioned somewhere in these transcripts and I just haven't come across it yet. Okay, and this is still David Stirling on the stand. While you were there, what was the turnover rate, the churn rate of distributors?
It was very high. In fact, for some years it was 100% in, 100% out. So the number of active distributors stayed the same. So you would have, if you have 5 million new people join, you have 5 million people that would leave as well.
Now, how many active distributors were there in or about 2007 when you were fired?
If I define active as the industry often does, which is they purchased in the last 12 months, if I use that as a standard, they would have been around probably maybe a couple 100,000 active.
Now, could it have been as low as 120,000 when you were terminated?
Active?
Yes.
By that definition, it could have been.
Whether it's 120 or 200, what were the number that were joining per year and leaving per year?
You know, we managed to raise that retention somewhat the last couple of years in particular, and that's where some growth came from.
Retention being those who would stay?
Yes, increase that retention level.
I'm not asking you if you were able to raise that level. I'm asking how many would join and how many would leave.
I don't remember in the latter years, but I do remember in the first couple of years, it was early in my first year, I remember it was 5,000 in every month, 5,000 out. That was a monthly number. 5,000 in, 5,000 out. The line was just flat as can be in those earlier years.
What did you attribute that to as the COO of the company?
There's a number of things that would have caused that.
What were they?
Certainly the problems we've been talking about about Gary Young. You know, the company, most people that were there were interested in essential oils. That's what they came for. They weren't interested in the company that was about a man, and they were irritated by that, had problems with that. There's probably a lot of reasons. Some of the services weren't where they needed to be improved. The focus was on the farms, on jousting, on creating medieval villages that people didn't care about. There were a lot of reasons.
So you kind of identified the focus, meaning the focus of management?
Correct.
And services would mean that support group weren't providing sufficient services to the distributors.
Correct.
You said as well that there were problems with the Gary Young persona?
Yes.
And then the focus seemed to be on Gary Young and not on essential oils.
Correct.
Are there any others than those four?
Off the top of my head, those were probably some of the main issues. I will maybe add one other thing. There was, if you joined Young Living back in those days, what was taught frequently, particularly by Gary, was just a real negativity towards allopathic Western medicine. And these guys are bad, and only the holistic natural stuff was good, and these guys have bad agendas. That didn't fly well with a lot of people.
So you either had to believe in naturopathy and nothing else.
Correct. There was no mix. So the first thing I have to say about this is that I have said this for so long, that this is what Gary taught, that there is no mix. And that's a problem. That the most egregious thing that Young Living taught was that Western medicine, or just science-based medicine, should be replaced by this stuff. Not that using oils is inherently dangerous. I wasn't trying to suggest that, but if you replace chemotherapy with oils, if you replace dialysis with something, if you replace serious science-based medical procedures for serious conditions with holistic medicine, aka mysticism or metaphysics-based medicine, like essential oils,
placebos,
then yeah, you're just relying on a placebo, and that's incredibly dangerous. People have always said to me, "Oh well, I don't think that they're teaching that. I think that they're just saying that we should be open-minded to using this stuff too." I don't have so much of a problem with people being open-minded to using a wide variety of treatments or whatever, as long as they are willing to use the ones that are scientifically based, that we have good evidence to think work. But that is not what Young Living has taught.
Yeah, from the very beginning, Young Living was teaching that stuff. And I think it was only until people like David Stirling and these other executives were like, Gary, you can't be saying this because that's illegal to say, that they kind of started shifting the narrative around that.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I want to point out is that Gary Young was spinning this idea that people outside of basically Young Living that prop up science-based medicine as legitimate, have bad agendas, and there's this big grand conspiracy to suppress, such and such.
Yeah.
There's an element of truth to it. It's like, yes, big corporations controlling medicine is bad. Like, it's not a good thing. We do have profit-driven medicine, especially in the U.S., and that's a really messed up thing. But that's not what he was saying. He wasn't saying, oh, they only care about profits and that's about it. He was like, they're trying to purposely poison you to try to get you to, like, basically worship Satan.
Yeah.
And they are doing the literal devil's work trying to distract you from God's blessings. Puggles is like digging. And maybe Gary Young believed that grand conspiracy. Maybe he really did, but regardless of whether it was...
Sorry, I'm just laughing now because Puggles is being so noisy.
Regardless of whether or not he believed it, it really served to sell the product, I think. If like literal evil forces are against you and you say that, if people believe you, they'll be like, wow, huh. So this thing is good enough and powerful enough and godly enough that these forces of Satan, these forces of evil and corruption and greed are all against it. Well, I think that I need to be all in for this kind of thing. And I mean, this narrative of good guys and bad guys, good and evil, is something that got people on board with Young Living.
Yeah.
Every distributor I've ever known had talked to me about how, evil was against Young Living, and that's one of the reasons why they realized that it was so necessary for them to be involved.
Yeah.
It's sad that, I mean, really all it was just a conspiracy, and even people within Young Living knew that it was just a conspiracy.
Knew that it was just kind of bullshit. And I mean, Gary was basically telling people that there's all these problems and that they're sick and that Western medicine is making them sicker. And then he's like, but I have the cure and I can sell it to you. There was another part of this transcript that we're not going to read because it's just like, it's so much. But someone was talking about how, like, whenever Gary had a problem with someone in the company, he would always say that they were, like, being ruled by Satan, or, like, they had demonic possession or whatever. So,
wow.
It's like, anyone that was against Gary Young, he accused of being, like, full of demons and stuff, which I feel like kind of fits his very good versus evil narrative.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I know of plenty of people who, while not necessarily involved with Young Living or supportive of Young Living anymore, latched on to this narrative that Gary Young was spinning, all these conspiracies. And now, I mean, even without Young Living, they still believe that. They're, like, anti-vax. They think that COVID was just, like, created in a lab in order to, like, poison people, and it was all the Democrats that were doing it, and the FDA and the World Health Organization, they're all in cahoots to do something for the agenda of Satan. And I mean, when you are trying to sell a product and you come up with narratives that are really powerful, sometimes they stick with people and kind of poison their minds to the point where they go off the rails when it comes to critical thinking. They start believing in things that are extremely damaging and not just things that serve your bottom line. That's why I think spreading these conspiracies is so deeply unethical, not just because, you're making a sale because of it and it's like, it's just greedy. No, you are undercutting people's critical thinking and trust of legitimate institutions so much that you're putting people in harm's way. I mean, people are in danger of dying because of the things that they believe because of Gary Young.
I mean, clearly, like we saw in the transcripts, people were getting rashes because they were using the oils, and hundreds of thousands of people were scammed by Young Living. And these transcripts just kind of show you that this entire time, a specific narrative has been, Gary and other people have been trying to spin this specific narrative in order to take money from people.
Yeah. If he really believed this stuff and it wasn't about money for him, does that make him an even more dangerous person?
There is another part of the transcript that we didn't read where he says, like, oh, this was never about the money.
I mean...
It's like, I mean, I think it definitely, money had a little bit to do with it, for sure. But I think he was also just, he really was chasing recognition, but he didn't want to necessarily put the work in for it. Or he had like ideas that wouldn't fit with that. Like if he wanted to be an actual medical doctor, he could have pursued a degree, but he didn't because he had a very specific agenda in mind, I think. He wanted to be this god figure, and he was that for a while.
Oh, how the mighty have fallen.
Yeah. I really do not think that Young Living can turn this around. I
hope
mean,
not.
everyone's leaving that company. They apparently have been operating at a loss for over a year now. Now with all of this, and I think it's been made public knowledge, so I think I can talk about this. There's going to be a documentary exposing Young Living, like a big documentary, like on a big, like everyone knows media company.
They end up actually
hopefully
finishing it.
But this is public knowledge already because people have been talking about it. But I don't think that it can turn around for them, and I'm not sad about that at all because they deserve everything that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much for watching, and a huge thank you to my patrons who help make these videos possible. If you liked this video, please be sure to subscribe and ring the bell. If you'd like to follow me on social media, my Instagram is Taylor_the_Antibot, and my Twitter is the Antibot. If you'd like to donate to this channel financially, a link to my Patreon will be down in the description below, and I'll see you all in the next one. Say bye!